Welcome to the HAP3 Baseline Data for Outcome Goals technical webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to review the baseline data for outcome goals spreadsheet, provide details on how the measures were calculated, and explain some key differences between the baseline data for outcome goals performance measures and the HUD system performance measures, or SPM. The agenda for this webinar is review the purpose of baseline data for outcome goals spreadsheet and the HAP3 outcome goals, walk through the tabs in the spreadsheet and data in the baseline data spreadsheet and discuss the performance measures, provide an overview of the tabs that show additional details for measures 1 through 7, and review examples of how client records are calculated in the baseline data performance measures. The baseline data for outcome goals spreadsheet was created to provide jurisdictions applying for HAP3 funding baseline and detailed data to use when setting their outcome goals in their local homelessness action plans, which are required as part of the HAP3 application. Each applicant must set 6 outcome goals related to addressing and reducing homelessness in their community, as well as trackable goals on achieving these outcomes for populations that are disproportionately impacted by homelessness in the local community. The outcome goals and baseline data are all at the continuum of care, or COC level. These goals are not intended to be goals specifically for using HAP3 funding, but are meant to be goals for how you plan to address homelessness in your community using all resources available, including HAP funding. The data used for the baseline data for outcome goal spreadsheet are generated from each COC's HMIS upload to the state's Homeless Data Integration System, or HDIS. The outcome goal performance measures are similar to HUD system performance measures, or SPM, but there are several differences to meet California's statutory requirements. A key difference between the HUD SPM and the outcome goal performance measures is that the outcome goal measures include people who were served only by non-residential projects while they were experiencing homelessness to ensure that people experiencing unsheltered homelessness are included in the data. Non-residential projects include street outreach, coordinated entry, day shelters, as well as other services-only projects. This will allow applicants to set appropriate outcome goals that address the full scope of homelessness in the COC. This timeline helps to show what it means to set outcome goals in relation to the baseline period. Performance on each of the 6 measures and respective population performance is based on 12-month reporting periods. In the graphic, the baseline year of calendar year 2020 is blue. The outcome goal will be measured based on performance for fiscal year 2024, which is shown in green. The outcome goal should reflect the amount of achievable progress, either in terms of counts or percentage point change, that you expect to see when comparing performance from FY 2024 with CY 2020. We recognize that CY 2020 data was impacted by the pandemic, but you may find it helpful to review the past performance for 2018 and 2019 to see your historical annual level of change. Next, we will go through the spreadsheet tabs. In the baseline data spreadsheet, you will find 8 tabs. First, a glossary tab with detailed descriptions of each measure and key term definitions. A HAP3 Table 4 Outcome Goals tab, which is copied from the application template. The 2020 baseline data is populated in this tab. CY 2020 baseline data for goals. This tab includes 2018, 2019, and 2020 data with the percent change over those 3 years. Measure 1A and 2 Count Detail tab. Measures 3 and 6 Exit Detail tab. Measure 4 Length of Time Homeless Detail tab. Measure 5 Returns Detail tab. And finally, Measure 7 Population Groups Detail tab. We will go through the data in each tab in more detail during this webinar. The first tab is the glossary, which provides definitions for key terms used throughout the baseline data spreadsheet. You can also find the glossary in the companion guide, which includes more details on each measure, as well as examples of how to use the baseline data to set your outcome goals. Also included in the companion guide is a crosswalk between the outcome goals performance measures and the HUD measures, which includes more detail on how the measures are calculated. The next tab is HAP 3 Table 4 Outcome Goals, which is copied directly from the HAP 3 application and is included here for reference. This table shows each outcome goal and the related 2020 baseline data to use to help set the goal. In Table 4, you will see that the baseline data for calendar year 2020 has been populated into the baseline data box for each outcome goal. Applicants can use this tab in the baseline data spreadsheet to draft their goals and then copy this tab into the application, but they are not required to enter data into this tab in this spreadsheet. As a reminder, the outcome goals as defined in statute are shown here. 1A, reducing the number of persons experiencing homelessness. 1B, reducing the number of persons experiencing homelessness on a daily basis. 2, reducing the number of persons who become homeless for the first time. 3, increasing the number of people exiting homelessness into permanent housing. 4, reducing the length of time persons remain homeless. 5, reducing the number of persons who return to homelessness after exiting homelessness to permanent housing. And 6, increasing successful placements from street outreach. Additionally, applicants must address how they will meet these goals for populations that have been disproportionately impacted by homelessness in their communities. This graphic shows the relationship between the HAP 3 data tables template and the calendar year 2020 baseline data for goals tab. The CY 2020 baseline data point for each measure has been transferred directly into the HAP 3 data tables, shown with solid red arrows. The percent change in performance from calendar year 2018 to calendar year 2020 should inform the development of the outcome goals for each measure, shown in the dotted blue arrows. Next is the baseline data for outcome goals tab, which reports the CY 2020 data for each outcome goal performance measure in column B. Prior performance data for CY 2018 and 2019 are also provided, as well as the percent change from 2018 to 2020 in column G. This 3-year timeframe mirrors the 3-year HAP 3 performance period, which is July 2021 through June 2024. When setting goals, consider how much change you believe the COC could achieve over each unique measure from the CY 2020 baseline through the end of fiscal year 2024. This information should be used to inform the goal setting process. How to use this data to set goals was covered in the Introduction to HDIS Baseline Measures webinar. Next, we will go through how client records for different types of projects are counted in the baseline data. Measures 1A, 1B, and 2 are counts of people who experienced homelessness in the COC. The calculation for these measures and the measures that follow start with identifying who experienced homelessness at any point during the year based on project enrollment dates in HDIS to construct the person's record of homelessness. For people who were served in entry-exit emergency shelters, which is shelters that are using the entry-exit tracking method, safe havens, and transitional housing projects, people are considered to be experiencing homelessness between their project enrollment or start date and their project end or exit date. People who were enrolled in permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and any other permanent housing projects are counted as experiencing homelessness between their project start date and housing move-in date or exit from the project, whichever occurs first. If at any point during 2020, a person enrolled in permanent housing had time between their project start and a housing move-in date while enrolled in the permanent housing project, they will be counted in Measure 1A even if they moved into housing during the year. In emergency shelters that utilize the night-by-night tracking method, people are assumed to be active in the project between their first and last bed night recorded during their project enrollment. If there are no bed nights recorded, they are assumed to have stayed in the project and have been experiencing homelessness on the project start date and for 15 days following that date, referred to as the buffer period, or until their project end date, whichever is earlier. In non-residential projects, only people who had a current living situation, or CLS, recorded during their enrollment with a living situation considered to be homeless are counted in the measures. Whenever there is a homeless CLS recorded, the person is considered to be experiencing homelessness on that day of the contact and for the 15 days before and the 15 days after. This is called a buffer period. Because non-residential projects are typically not in contact with people daily, people are considered to be homeless for the month-long period during which the contact occurs. If there is a break of more than 60 days after a service contact with a CLS date, the client is considered to have exited the project. If there's a later service contact that occurs more than 60 days from the prior contact, the person is considered to have re-entered the project. Later in this webinar, we will review visual examples demonstrating how these breaks and buffers are calculated for night-by-night shelters and non-residential projects and how those calculations impact the performance measures. Measure 1A, count of people experiencing homelessness. Measure 1A is an unduplicated count of people who experienced homelessness within the COC during the year. This includes people who were served in emergency shelters, safe havens, and transitional housing, people served by permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and other permanent housing projects who had time during the year between an enrollment date and a housing move-in date when they were considered homeless, and people who were only served by non-residential projects, including street outreach, coordinated entry, day shelters, and other services-only projects. This differs from the HUD SPM count of people experiencing homelessness because it includes people who had only been served by non-residential projects during the year. This difference from the HUD SPM allows communities to get a more accurate picture of the total number of people who experienced homelessness in their community and develop plans for addressing the potential unmet need. As discussed, to determine if a person served in a non-residential project was experiencing homelessness, the Measure 1A calculation considers several factors. The person must have at least one contact date between their project start and end date where there was a recorded current living situation, indicating a homeless situation. For example, a person who was enrolled in a coordinated entry project with a documented living situation of a place not fit for human habitation on a date that falls within their project enrollment and occurs during the reporting period would be counted in Measure 1A even if they had no enrollments in the year in an emergency shelter, transitional housing, or street outreach project. Conversely, if a person had only one enrollment in HMIS, it was in a coordinated entry project, and their only recorded current living situation indicated that they were staying or living with family or friends, they would not be counted in Measure 1A. Likewise, if a person were enrolled in a street outreach project in the prior year and had no contacts with a current living situation during the reporting year, they would not be counted in Measure 1A even though the enrollment was still active. Measure 1B is the unsheltered point-in-time count. This number comes of people who experienced unsheltered homelessness at a point in time during the year, comes directly from the COC's 2020 point-in-time or PIT count. This is the only measure in the baseline data spreadsheet that is not sourced from HDIS. For COCs that did not conduct counts in even years, the PIT from the prior year is reported. If a COC did not conduct a 2020 PIT count, their 2019 PIT count is used as the baseline measure for 1B. Measure 2, first-time homelessness. Measure 2 is the count of people who experienced first-time homelessness during the year. As in the HUD SPM, first-time homelessness is defined as having had no enrollments in HMIS while experiencing homelessness within the 24 months prior to their new enrollment during the year. The calculation for Measure 2 differs from the HUD SPM first-time homelessness measure in a few ways. As with the other outcome goal measures, Measure 2 includes people entering the homelessness system who were only served by street outreach or other non-residential projects. Measure 2 also looks back for any enrollments in non-residential projects to determine if the person had experienced homelessness in the last 24 months. For example, if a person enrolled in an emergency shelter during 2020 and their only other quote-unquote time homeless in the prior 2 years was in a coordinated entry project in 2019, they would not be counted as experiencing first-time homelessness in Measure 2. However, in the HUD SPM, their 2020 shelter entry would have been counted as their first-time homeless, since the HUD SPM does not count time enrolled in non-residential projects for this measure. Additionally, because HDIS includes data from all California COCs, Measure 2 considers any time spent experiencing homelessness in another COC in the last 24 months when evaluating whether a person is experiencing homelessness for the first time. For example, if a person was served in an emergency shelter in Sacramento in 2019 and later enrolls in an emergency shelter in Riverside for the first time in 2020, they are not considered to be experiencing homelessness for the first time in 2020 and would not be counted in Measure 2. Measure 3, system exits to permanent destinations. Measure 3 reports exits from the homelessness system into permanent housing. The focus for this measure is on system exits rather than exits from specific project types. A system exit is an exit from any project in HDIS where the person did not have a subsequent enrollment in any other project in the system within 14 days following the exit. Unlike the HUD SPM, Measure 3 includes all successful exits from PSH or OPH projects, even if the person had moved into the permanent housing project with a move-in date. The HUD SPM exits measure only counts exits from permanent housing projects when the person exited the permanent housing project before they had a housing move-in date in that project. Unlike the HUD SPM, any exit within these parameters will be counted in Measure 3, even if the person returns after 14 days to the homelessness system during the year. In the HUD SPM, if a person who is active in a homelessness system project in HMIS on the last day of the reporting year, any earlier project exit they had would not count in the exits measure. For example, a person exited an emergency shelter to a permanent destination in January 2020. They later enrolled in another emergency shelter in June 2020 and were still enrolled in shelter on the last day of the year. This would be counted as a successful exit to a permanent destination in the Outcome Goal Performance Measure 3, but it would not be counted as a successful exit in the HUD SPM. However, their return would also be counted as a return to homelessness in Outcome Goal Performance Measure 5, which we will discuss later in this webinar. As with the other outcome goal performance measures, exits to permanent destinations from non-residential projects while the person was experiencing homelessness are also counted in Measure 3. The exit destinations counted as permanent destinations are the same as in the HUD SPM. Measure 3 does not include exits to temporary or institutional settings. That data is included in the Measure 3 detail tab. Measure 4, length of time homeless. Measure 4 is the average length of time in the number of days that people experienced homelessness during the year. This includes days enrolled in street outreach or other non-residential projects while experiencing homelessness, days in emergency shelter, transitional housing, or safe haven projects, and days between project enrollment and housing move-in for people enrolled in rapid rehousing and permanent housing projects. Similar to the HUD SPM, length of time homeless for the year includes days during the reporting period, as well as any days prior to the beginning of the reporting period that overlap with the start of the period. For example, if a person was enrolled in a transitional housing project on January 1st, 2020, and that enrollment started in December 2019, the Measure 4 calculation will look back to the start of this homelessness episode in December 2019 and include those days in their 2020 length of time homeless. Unlike the HUD SPM, enrollments with fewer than 7 days between them are counted as one continuous homelessness episode and counted toward the length of time homeless calculation in the baseline data. The HUD SPM only counts enrollments as continuous if a project start date is on the same day or the day following the prior project exit date. If a person has overlapping enrollments or buffer periods, those days are only counted once toward length of time homeless. No days are counted more than once for one person. For example, if someone had overlapping enrollments in an emergency shelter and a street outreach project, these days would only be counted one time toward their length of time homeless. As described earlier in this webinar, people enrolled in night-by-night shelters are considered to be active in the project and experiencing time homeless based on their bed nights recorded between their project start date and project exit date, or the report end date if earlier. If there were no bed nights recorded during the enrollment in the year, Measure 4 would count the project entry date plus the 15 days after toward their length of time homeless. The HUD SPM does not make any adjustments for people enrolled in night-by-night shelters that did not have any recorded bed nights during the enrollments. They would not have any days counted as homeless in the SPM's length of time homeless. The HUD SPM calculation for night-by-night shelters also includes any time the person reported as experiencing homelessness before project entry, as recorded in their prior living situation in HMIS. Measure 4 does not include any time homeless that was reported in prior living situation for night-by-night shelters. Street outreach and other non-residential projects count days homeless based on recorded contact dates with homeless current living situations during the enrollment period. An additional 15-day buffer period is added both before and after the contact date. So one recorded contact date within the enrollment period will count for up to 30 days of homelessness in Measure 4 for non-residential projects. Measure 5 returns to homelessness system. Measure 5 reports returns to the homelessness system after an exit to a permanent destination as a percentage of exits to permanent destinations. The return rate is the number of people who returned within 6 months of exiting to permanent destinations as a percentage of the total number of exits to permanent housing. The exits counted in the return rate calculation are a person's first exit from the system to permanent housing during the year, and the return is a subsequent return enrollment. Unlike in the HUD SPM, a person is counted as returning to homelessness if they return to any project type in the system while experiencing homelessness. If a person exits from an emergency shelter to a permanent destination and returns within 6 months to the system with an enrollment in any non-residential project where they also have a homeless current living situation documented, that is counted as a return to homelessness in Measure 5. Measure 6, successful exits from street outreach. Measure 6 reports successful exits from street outreach projects. For street outreach, successful exits are defined as an exit from a street outreach project to a permanent or temporary destination, including into emergency shelters, transitional housing, or certain institutional settings. As with Measure 3, and unlike the HUD SPM, Measure 6 counts people who exited during the year, but then later returned to the system and were actively enrolled in a homelessness system project on the last day of the year. The destinations considered to be successful for street outreach exit mirror successful destinations in the HUD SPM for successful exits from street outreach. This graphic shows examples of 3 different people served by the homelessness system to demonstrate how exits and returns to homelessness are calculated in Measures 3 and 5. The first person is counted in Measure 3. They exited the system to permanent housing on February 15th. They later returned to emergency shelter on July 5th, so they are also counted in Measure 5 as they return within 6 months. In the HUD SPM, however, the exit in February would not have been counted since they were active in emergency shelter at the end of the year. But the baseline data measures include exits where the person did not return within 14 days. The second person shown exited the system on June 25th, 2020, but that is not counted as a system exit in Measure 3 because they returned within 14 days on July 1st, 2020. They had another exit on September 16th, which is counted in Measure 3. They are also counted in the returns measure since they returned within 6 months after their exit on September 16th. Notice that the return in this case was to a coordinated entry project where they had a documented homeless current living situation. The third person shown had 2 exits to permanent housing during the year. Because Measure 3 only counts the last successful exit in the year, their exit on October 15th is counted as their system exit for the year. Measure 5, however, looks at a person's first exit during the year with a subsequent return. So they are also counted as a return to homelessness after their January 5th exit. Next, we will go through the measure detail tabs. The baseline data spreadsheet includes tabs with additional details for each of the outcome goal performance measures. These tabs show the calendar year 2020 baseline data for each measure, plus additional information that applicants can use to inform their assessments of their COC's performance and the setting of their outcome goals. The first is Measure 1A and 2 Detail tab. The Measure 1A and 2 Count Detail tab provides information on the counts of people accessing services, reported separately in 3 groups. First, people experiencing homelessness who were active in a project on January 1st, also referred to as the continuously homeless. People who entered the system during the year who are newly homeless, and people who returned to the homelessness system during the year. People are only included in once in these counts, meaning people who are counted as active on January 1st are not counted in the returner column, even if they exit and subsequently return to the system within the year. The total of these 3 groups is the total number of people who experienced homelessness during the year, or Measure 1A, which is shown in a blue box. In lines 7 to 9, the counts of people who experienced homelessness are broken out by the types of projects they were enrolled in HMIS. Line 7 shows the number of people who were served only in non-residential projects, such as street outreach, coordinated entry, and supportive service only projects, who reported they were homeless on the current living situation, who are assumed to be unsheltered while accessing services. Line 8 shows the number of people served in residential only programs, including emergency shelter, safe havens, and transitional housing or permanent housing projects with time prior to a housing move-in date. Line 9 shows the number of people reported as receiving both types of services. This allows the COC to understand the overlap of people observed to be unsheltered and served by shelter and housing projects in the system. Lines 11 through 19 show the number of people who experienced homelessness by the HMIS project type they were enrolled in during the year. Because people can be served in more than one project type during the year, these counts by project type do not add up to the count of unduplicated people who experienced homelessness during the year. Below line 19, you will find the same information for 2019 and 2018. Next is Measures 3 and 6 Exit Detail tab. The Measure 3 and 6 Exit Detail tab provides more detailed information on all exits from the homelessness system. Column B shows exits to permanent destinations as reported in Measure 3. Additionally, the tab shows the total number of exits, including exits to temporary and unknown destinations, in addition to permanent destinations, and the exit success rate, which is the percent of the total number of exits that were to permanent destinations. This information is meant to provide further context for Measure 3. For example, if the number of permanent exits in Measure 3 has been decreasing, you can use this tab to investigate whether all system exits have been decreasing, or if only the number of successful exits has been decreasing, and use that information when setting outcome goals. Lines 7 to 11 reports the number of exits for people based on the project type from which they were last served prior to their system exit. This information can help applicants see which parts of the system are most successful at helping people move to permanent housing. Line 13 is the number of people who were permanently housed in the system in HMIS. This number is not included in the total number of system exits, but it can help applicants understand how many people are permanently housed but have not yet exited the homelessness system. This tab also includes additional information used for Measure 6, successful exits for street outreach. In addition to the number of successful exits reported in Measure 6, you can see the total number of exits from street outreach, including exits to unknown or other destinations not considered successful, and the success rate, which is the percentage of the total exits that were to successful destinations. Below line 20, you will find the same information on exits for CYs 2019 and 2018 to provide context on historical trends in system exits and help inform the goal setting process. Next is Measure 4 Length of Time Homelessness Detail tab. The Measure 4 Length of Time Homeless Detail tab reports further details on the number of days that people experienced homelessness while enrolled in different types of projects in the system. On line 6, you can see the baseline average number of days homeless in the system reported in Measure 4, as well as the median length of time homeless. Lines 7 to 11 reports the average and median days homeless by the project types in which people were served: emergency shelter or safe haven projects, transitional housing, any cumulative days homeless across shelter, safe haven, or transitional housing projects, plus any additional days homeless in street outreach or other non-residential projects, or additional days homeless while enrolled in rapid rehousing or permanent housing projects. These are days between the project enrollment and before a housing move-in date. Note that any overlapping days in different projects or project types is unduplicated in the reported numbers. These project type breakouts can help you determine which parts of the system are contributing the most toward length of time homeless in Measure 4. Next is Measure 5 Returns Detail tab. The Measure 5 Returns to Homelessness Detail tab provides additional details on returns to the homelessness system. In column D, line 7, the baseline number of households returning to homelessness within 6 months of system exit to a permanent destination is shown, and the corresponding return rate for that group is in column E, line 7. This rate is Measure 5. The tab also provides the number of returnees who return to the system within 1 and 2 years of their exit. This data will only be shown once sufficient time has passed for the exit cohort to be able to report these numbers. These columns will be filled in as the data is available. The total number of people with a system exit, line 6, people with a system exit to a temporary destination, line 8, and people with a system exit to an unknown destination, line 9, and the subset of these groups who returned are also shown on this tab. Lines 10 through 24 show exit and returns data by the project type from which the person was last served in the homelessness system prior to their exit. This information can help applicants assess which project types in the homelessness system are the least likely to see their clients return to the system after exiting. Below, the same information is provided for calendar years 2019 and 2018. The last tab in the spreadsheet is Measure 7, Population Groups Detail tab. In the HAP 3 Data Tables template, applicants are asked to describe any underserved or disproportionately impacted populations that your community will especially focus on related to each outcome goal. While applicants are not required to use HDIS-generated baseline data to identify underserved and/or disproportionately impacted populations, the data on this tab may help to understand the relative size of different groups, which could be compared with other data sources to determine if specific groups are overrepresented among people experiencing homelessness and their outcomes in relation to the 6 outcome goal performance measures. The tab shows each baseline data performance measure across the top row. Each column represents a different baseline data measure. Each row below breaks out the top line number for the measure by the household composition, gender, ethnicity, and race, and different subpopulations that are counted in the top line measure number. Please note that because people can be part of different household types over the course of the year, the sum of the household types does not necessarily add up to the top line number in line 8. Additionally, because of state privacy laws, any cell value that is smaller than 11 is suppressed and will show 3 asterisks instead of the value. We'll now review how client records and length of time homeless are calculated for people who were served by non-residential projects or night-by-night shelters. Determining who experienced homelessness in non-residential projects starts with identifying who was enrolled in street outreach, services only, coordinated entry, day shelters, and other types of projects during the year. For client records to be counted in the performance measures, people enrolled in non-residential projects in HMIS must have a documented contact date with a homeless current living situation or CLS or a homeless prior living situation recorded at project entry. To determine the start and end dates of each homelessness episode, 15-day buffer periods are added before and after each contact date. This resets the enrollment start to the 15 days prior to the first contact, and the end date is reset to 15 days after the contact. When there are fewer than 60 days between homeless CLS contact dates within the same enrollment, the person is not considered to have a break in homelessness. This would be counted as one continuous period of homelessness, starting 15 days before the first contact and ending 15 days after the last contact in the continuous period. This slide shows examples of how people served by non-residential projects are determined to have been experiencing homelessness and counted in Measure 1A. In the first example, Person A is counted in Measure 1A. They have a recorded CLS in 2020 on March 16th. Person B is not counted in Measure 1A. Even though they had an active enrollment in HMIS during the year, they have no recorded homeless PLS or CLS in 2020, so they cannot be assumed to be experiencing homelessness during the year. Person C is not counted in Measure 1A. While they have a recorded CLS of living with family and friends, they have no homeless PLS or CLS records in 2020. The last person, Person D, is counted in Measure 1A. Although their project start date and homeless CLS were recorded in 2019, the 15-day buffer after their first CLS extends into 2020, so they are assumed to have been experiencing homelessness during 2020. This slide shows an example of how length of time homeless is calculated for non-residential projects. Anne enrolled in street outreach on December 15th, 2019, but did not have a recorded current living situation. The first CLS with a homeless situation was recorded in HMIS on January 30th. 15 days are added before and after this date. The new enrollment start date is January 15th, 2020, and exit date on February 15th, 2020. Their second homeless CLS was recorded on June 1st, 2020. The active period of program involvement is considered to be May 17th through June 16th. Their third CLS was on July 15th. So program involvement is June 30th to July 30th. But because there are less than 60 days between June 16th and June 30th, this becomes one continuous enrollment starting on May 17th and ending on July 30th. The original enrollment end date in HMIS was November 30th, but there was no CLS recorded, so this record is not included as an active period of program involvement. The client now has 2 enrollment records for the purposes of the baseline measure, and all the days represented by the blue arrows are counted towards their length of time homeless. In the next example, Brian enrolled in a coordinated entry project on March 16th, 2020, but did not have a homeless current living situation or prior living situation collected. Their next CLS was on April 20th, when they reported living in a place not fit for human habitation. They are counted as experiencing homelessness from April 5th to May 5th, 2020. Because there were no other CLS recorded during the 60 days after May 5th, 2020, they are considered to have exited the project as of May 5th. They later had a CLS on September 15th when they reported staying with family and friends. Their last CLS during 2020 was on October 20th when they reported living in a place not fit for human habitation. This is counted as their second enrollment record in which they experienced homelessness from October 5th to November 4th, 2020. They are considered to be returning to homelessness within 6 months in this example. Next, calculating client records in night-by-night shelters. People served by night emergency shelters are counted as experiencing homelessness based on bed nights recorded during the project enrollment. If there were no bed nights on the original project start date, the enrollment start date is reset to 15 days before the first bed night recorded, or the project start date, whichever is later. If there is no bed night on the original project end date, the enrollment end date is reset to 15 days after the last bed night, or the project end date, whichever is earlier. If there were no bed nights recorded during project enrollment, they are assumed homeless on the project start date plus a 15-day buffer period after the project start date. The new start date cannot extend before the original project start date, and the new end date cannot extend after the original project exit date. The examples on this slide show how people in night-by-night shelters are determined to be experiencing homelessness in 2020 and counted in Measure 1A. Person A is counted in Measure 1A. They have a bed night in 2020. Person B is not counted in Measure 1A. They have no bed nights in the enrollment, so the person is assumed to have stayed on the start date. Start date is set to the original project start of December 1st, 2019, and the end date is 15 days later, December 16th, 2019, although the original project end date was in 2020. Person C is counted in Measure 1A. Their start date is set to the original project start, January 15th, 2020, and end date is reset to 15 days later, since they have no bed nights recorded. Person D is counted in Measure 1A. They have bed nights recorded between the project start and end in 2020. In this example, Carol enrolled in a night-by-night emergency shelter project on February 5th, but had no bed night on the project enrollment date. Their first bed night was recorded on February 10th. The enrollment ended on September 10th, but the last bed night recorded was on August 1st. The project start date is reset to 15 days before the first bed night or the project start date, whichever is later. The enrollment end date is reset to 15 days after the last bed night recorded, or the enrollment end date, whichever is earlier. Carol's adjusted enrollment record starts February 5th, 2020, and ends on August 16th, 2020. In this example, Dan was enrolled in a night-by-night emergency shelter project on February 5th, 2020. The enrollment in HMIS ended on April 12th. There were no bed nights recorded during the enrollment. The start date is reset to February 5th, 2020, and the end date is reset to 15 days later, February 20th, 2020. That concludes the technical webinar on the baseline data for outcome goal performance measures. If you have any follow-up questions on the content of this webinar or would like to request additional technical assistance, please contact Cal ICH at the email shown below. Thank you.